Have you ever felt the bone-piercing wind of the Carpathian Mountains? Heard the wolves howling through the endless forests of Transylvania? These sounds echo across centuries, carrying with them whispers of ancient curses, creatures that dwell between the world of the living and the dead, and pagan rituals that survive the coming of Christianity. Welcome to lands where folklore is not mere superstition, but ancestral memory carved into the blood of peoples. I am Mr. Ravenhurst, and tonight we shall plunge into the frozen mists of Eastern Europe, where every village harbors terrible secrets, every forest shelters hungry demons, and every cemetery resonates with the laments of tormented souls. Prepare yourselves for this night. We shall cross the boundaries of the known to explore 12 Gothic legends that have haunted generations. From the ancestral vampires of Wałkia to the witches of the Bulan Mountains, from the shapeshifters of Poland to the vengeful spirits of Russia. These are not stories crafted to entertain children by the fireside. They are collective nightmares that echo truths about human nature and the horrors that can awaken when we transgress the boundaries of the sacred. If you, like me, feel fascination for the darkness that dwells in the forgotten corners of Europe, subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. Leave in the comments which of these legends disturbed you most. And now let our journey through the shadows of Eastern Europe begin. Strigoi, the dead who will not rest. Romania, Moldova. Listen carefully, for I shall tell you of a creature that predates Stoker's own Dracula in the shadowlands of Wałkia and Moldova, where the winds carry the scent of freshly turned earth and melted wax candles. They speak in whispers of the They are not vampires as we know them from books. There's something far more terrible. Imagine a tormented soul that refuses to accept death, returning to plague the living with an insatiable thirst, not merely for blood, but for life itself, energy, youth, the very essence of existence. The strigoi can be recognized by its grotesque appearance: hair red as fire, eyes that glow in darkness like embers, and a cadaverous pallor that makes the skin appear translucent. Unlike romanticized vampires, the strigoi is an abomination that crawls through darkness, leaving a trail of death and madness. How is a strigoi born? Through violent death, suicide, or when a person dies with unfinished business, hatred in their heart. More terrible still, a child born with teeth or with a membrane over their face is destined to become a strigoi after death. Legend tells of Radu, the blacksmith who died in 1847 after being betrayed by his wife. 3 nights after burial, villagers of Brisov began reporting terrible visions. Radu walking the streets at midnight, knocking on doors, calling the names of his former neighbors. Those who answered the call were found the next morning aged decades in a single night. Can you imagine the horror? The strigoi does not merely kill, it consumes vital essence, leaving its victims as empty shells, living mummies that waste away until death claims them. To destroy a strigoi, one must exhume the body and pierce its heart with a stake of oak wood. But beware, if you miss the heart, the creature will awaken with multiplied fury, and no earthly force will be able to stop it. Rusuka, the sirens of frozen rivers. Russia, Ukraine, Poland. From the murky waters of the Volga and the frozen streams of the Carpath emerges one of the most seductive and deadly creatures of Slavic folklore, the Rus. Part woman, part aquatic spirit, part ancestral nightmare. Do not confuse these creatures with the mermaids of Western fairy tales. The Rusulki are born of tragedy, of premature death, of feminine despair. They are the souls of young women who died by drowning, some by accident, others by suicide, many murdered by cruel lovers or violent husbands. Imagine Katarina, a young peasant girl of merely 16 years, promised in marriage to a man she despised. On the night before her wedding, she fled to the banks of the Dnieper River, where she cast herself into the icy waters. Her soul, refusing to accept such injustice, transformed into something far more dangerous than a simple corpse. The Rusalka possesses supernatural beauty that no man can resist. Hair long as seaweed, eyes green as the depths of lakes, melodious voice that echoes through morning mists. She sings on riverbanks during full moon nights, luring solitary travelers with promises of eternal love. But what fate awaits those who succumb to her enchantment? The Rusalka drags them to the depths where she drowns them slowly, savoring each moment of terror in their eyes. It is not merely revenge. It is necessity. She needs the vital force of men to maintain her form between the worlds of the living and the dead. During Rasulka week, the week preceding Pentecost, these creatures become especially active. They emerge from rivers in groups, dancing naked through fields, seducing not only men but curious children who venture too close to the water. The only protection? Always carry a branch of oak or wormwood, sacred plants that Rasulki fear and never respond to the song that echoes from dark waters in the dead of night. Baba Yaga, the Witch of Bones. Russia, Slavic countries. In the depths of Russian forests, where pine trees grow so dense they block sunlight even at midday, stands a hut that defies all laws of physics and reason, a dwelling built upon giant chicken legs that walks through the forest like a living nightmare. This is the home of Baba Yaga, perhaps the most terrible of all witches in world folklore. She is not a simple sorceress. She is a primordial force predating Christianity, a manifestation of the darkest aspect of feminine nature. Baba Yaga possesses 3 faces: the giver who offers help to the brave, the guardian who tests the moral worth of visitors, and the devourer who consumes those who fail her tests. She is a creature of iron teeth and bone legs, flying through the sky in a mortar, steering with a pestle, sweeping away her tracks with a broom made of silver birch. Her hut spins constantly on its chicken legs, and the fence surrounding it is adorned with human skulls, whose empty sockets glow with supernatural fire. When someone approaches seeking her aid, the hut turns its back to them, for none may enter without first proving their worth. Legend speaks of young Ivan, a woodcutter's son, who sought Baba Yaga's help to save his dying mother. When he reached the spinning hut, she emerged, a crone so ancient her iron teeth had worn grooves in her lips, her fingernails grown long as claws, her nose so hooked it nearly touched her chin. "Little mortal," she cackled, her voice like grinding millstones. "You seek my aid. Then you must complete 3 tasks. Fail anyone, and I shall grind your bones to make my bread." The first task: sort a roomful of mixed grains before dawn. The second: retrieve a magical ring from the bottom of a lake guarded by water spirits. The third: answered her riddle about the nature of death itself. Ivan completed the first 2 tasks through cleverness and courage, but when faced with her final riddle, he realized the terrible truth. Baba Yaga was not testing his wit. She was offering him a choice between wisdom and innocence. To answer correctly meant accepting that some knowledge comes at the price of one's humanity. Those who pass her test receive aid beyond their wildest dreams. Magical objects, prophetic knowledge, the power to reshape destiny itself. But those who fail, their screams echo through the forest for 7 days and 7 nights, until only silence remains. Have you ever wondered what price you would pay for the knowledge you seek? What boundaries you would cross to save those you love? In the depths of the Russian forest, Baba Yaga waits, still, her mortar and pestle ready to carry her to those desperate enough to seek her aid. UI, the blood-drinkers of Bohemia, Czech Republic, Slovakia. Before Transylvania became synonymous with vampirism, the lands of Bohemia and Moravia whispered of creatures even more ancient and terrible, the upper beings that blur the line between the living dead and something far more sinister. Picture the rolling hills of the Czech countryside in the 14th century, where Gothic cathedrals pierced the sky like stone fingers reaching toward heaven. It was here in the village of Kanahara that the first recorded UI sighting shattered the peaceful existence of a devout Christian community. Unlike the aristocratic vampires of later literature, the Opir was born from the soil itself, a peasant creature, crude and hungry. The transformation began with Vartlov, the miller, a man known for his cruelty to the poor who came begging for grain. When plague swept through the village in 1347, Vartslav refused aid to the suffering, instead profiting from their desperation. His death came violently, torn apart by wolves in his own mill. But death, it seemed, was merely the beginning of his true horror. 3 nights after burial, livestock began dying inexplicably, drained of blood, but showing no wounds. Children reported seeing a pale figure lurking near the cemetery, its red eyes glowing like coals in a blacksmith's forge. The Upir of Bohemian legend possesses certain unique characteristics that distinguish it from other blood-drinking undead. It can only rise from its grave between sunset and sunrise, but during these hours, it possesses supernatural strength and the ability to command wolves, bats, and rats. Most terrifyingly, it retains fragmented memories of its human life, using this knowledge to torment its former acquaintances. Václav began appearing to those who had once known him, calling them by name, reminding them of shared memories, luring them close enough to feed. His victims weren't merely drained of blood, they were infected with a wasting disease that turned them pale and weak, making them easier prey for subsequent attacks. The village priest, Father Karl, documented the creature's activities in his journal, providing us with one of the earliest detailed accounts of vampire behavior. He wrote, "The thing that was once Václav appears almost human, save for the pallor of death upon its flesh and the terrible hunger in its gaze. It speaks with his voice, yet the words carry the chill of the grave." The final confrontation came when the Opir made the mistake of targeting the priest's young nephew. Father Karl, armed with holy water, a crucifix, and an oak stake blessed by the Archbishop of Prague, led a group of villagers to the cemetery at dawn. They found Václav's corpse in its grave, but this was no peaceful rest. The body showed no signs of decay. Fresh blood stained its lips, and its fingernails had grown long and sharp. As they drove the stake through its heart, the creature's eyes snapped open, fixing Father Karol with a gaze of pure malevolence. "You think this ends it, priest?" it rasped with its final breath. "There are others. The hunger spreads like wildfire, and soon your God will not be enough to protect you." The UPS prophecy proved true. Within a year, 3 more cases appeared in neighboring villages, each following the same pattern: a cruel or greedy person dying violently, then returning with an insatiable thirst for blood. The Czech chronicles record various methods for identifying and destroying these creatures. They cast no reflection, cannot cross running water, and are repelled by garlic and holy symbols. But perhaps most chilling is the belief that an Upir can only be permanently destroyed if every person it fed upon is also found and cleansed, creating an endless cycle of investigation and horror. Do you feel that chill creeping up your spine? The Upir reminds us that evil, once unleashed, spreads like infection, corrupting not just individuals, but entire communities. In the quiet villages of Bohemia, they still place garlic over doorways and wear crosses close to their hearts, for they know that some hungers never truly die. Vela, the storm dancers, Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia. From the wind-swept peaks of the Dinaric Alps comes a legend that speaks to the very soul of the Balkan peoples. The Vera, spirits of nature, both beautiful and terrible, who dance on mountaintops and command the fury of storms. These are not gentle fairy folk from children's stories. The Va are the souls of women who died before their time, maidens who perished from heartbreak, brides killed on their wedding day, mothers lost in childbirth. Their anguish transformed them into something beyond human understanding, beings of pure elemental force. Imagine Melissa, a shepherd's daughter from the mountains of Montenegro, promised to a young warrior who rode off to battle the Ottoman invaders. She waited 7 years for his return, growing pale and thin as mountain snow until word came that he had fallen in a distant valley. That very night, as thunder crashed through the peaks, Melissa climbed to the highest cliff and cast herself into the abyss, but death could not contain her grief. She rose as a Vir, her form shifting between that of a beautiful woman and a creature of wind and lightning. Her hair became silver as moonlight, her dress woven from morning mist, her dance capable of summoning hurricanes that could level entire forests. The Va appear to travelers in the mountains, usually at dawn or dusk, when the boundary between worlds grows thin. They are achingly beautiful, with voices like crystal bells and movements graceful as flowing water. Yet beneath this ethereal beauty lies a dangerous wildness that can never be tamed. Oz dance is both blessing and curse. When she dances for joy, wild flowers bloom out of season, streams run clear and sweet, and the mountain air fills with the scent of paradise. But when she dances in sorrow or rage, the very earth trembles. Trees are uprooted by supernatural winds, avalanches bury villages, and lightning strikes with vengeful precision. Serbian folklore tells of Marko Krovic, a legendary hero who encountered a VA during a hunting expedition in the Kopionic Mountains. She appeared to him beside a crystalline pool more beautiful than any mortal woman and challenged him to a dance. Marko, renowned for his strength and courage, accepted. As they danced, the Vira's movements became increasingly wild and hypnotic. The very air around them began to swirl, and Marko felt his strength being drawn from his body like water from a broken vessel. He realized too late that this was no innocent game. The VR was testing whether he was worthy of life itself. "Tell me, hero," she whispered as they spun faster and faster. "What gives a mortal the right to take life from the forest? What makes your need greater than that of the deer you hunt, the wolves you slay?" Marko's answer determined his fate. Had he boasted of human superiority or claimed divine right, she would have danced him to death, leaving only his bones to warn future travelers. Instead, he acknowledged that all life was sacred, that he took only what was necessary for survival, and that he honored the spirit of every creature he killed. The Vera smiled and released him, but not before marking him with a silver thread woven into his hair, a sign that he was under her protection. From that day forward, no storm could harm him, no wild beast would attack him, and he could hear the voices of nature itself. But VA protection comes with a price. Those marked by the storm dancers can never fully return to ordinary human life. They become bridges between the natural and supernatural worlds, able to see and hear things that others cannot. Some call it a gift. Others know it as a beautiful curse. The Ver teach us that nature is not our servant, but our equal, demanding respect and offering wisdom to those humble enough to listen. In the Balkan Mountains, shepherds still leave offerings of bread and wine at high peaks, hoping to appease these storm dancers and ensure safe passage through their domain. Listen carefully on windy nights. If you hear music that seems to come from the air itself and see a figure dancing on a distant hilltop, remember, some dances are too beautiful for mortal eyes, and some storms are born from broken hearts that will never heal. Devoy, the house, spiritus, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. Not all creatures of Eastern European folklore dwell in dark forests or haunted graveyards. Some make their homes alongside humans, becoming part of the very fabric of domestic life. Meet the domovoi, house spirits whose presence can bring prosperity or ruin depending on how they are treated. Picture a traditional Russian ESB, a wooden house with carved window frames and a massive brick stove at its heart. To our eyes, it might appear empty, save for its human inhabitants. But those versed in the old ways know better. Every home, every hearth, every threshold harbors a domovoi, a household spirit as ancient as the Slavic peoples themselves. The domovoi appears as a small, elderly man, no taller than a child, covered head to toe in gray fur with bright eyes that gleam with ancient wisdom. Some say his face is human, others claim it shifts between human and beast. He dwells in the warmest parts of the house, behind the stove, under the threshold, in the root cellar where the family stores their winter provisions. This house spirit is neither good nor evil by nature, but rather reflects the character of those he serves. A kind family that honors the old traditions will find their domovoi a faithful guardian. He tends the fire through cold winter nights, watches over sleeping children, warns of approaching danger, and ensures that bread risses properly and milk doesn't sour. But woe to the household that shows disrespect or forgets the proper offerings. A displeased dom becomes a tormentor beyond imagination. He breaks dishes in the night, spoils food, causes accidents, and brings nightmares to those who sleep. His footsteps echo through the house like drumbeats of doom, and his angry moaning can drive an entire family to madness. The tale of the Vulav family of Novgorod illustrates both aspects of the domovoi's nature. For generations, the Vulavs had honored their house spirit, leaving out bread and salt, speaking his name with respect, never taking his protection for granted. In return, their home prospered. Their harvests were bountiful, their children healthy, their hearth always warm. But when young Pavel Volkov returned from Moscow in 1876, educated in Western ways and filled with modern skepticism, everything changed. He mocked his grandmother's offerings to the domovoi, declared such beliefs primitive superstition, and forbade anyone in the house from acknowledging the spirit's presence. The domovoi's revenge was swift and terrible. The family's prize horse broke its leg mysteriously. Their stored grain became infested with vermin overnight. Strange accidents plagued the household. Knives fell from shelves. Scalding water spilled without cause. Doors slammed shut with bone-breaking force. Most terrifying were the nighttime visitations. The domovoi would sit on sleeping family members' chests, nearly suffocating them while whispering accusations in their ears. "You have forgotten gratitude." His voice rustled like autumn leaves. "You have abandoned the old contracts. Now learn what it means to live without protection." Pavel's young wife began wasting away, claiming she felt constantly watched by hostile eyes. His children cried through the night. Speaking of the angry grandfather who pulled their hair and pinched them in their sleep, even Pavel himself began to doubt his skepticism when he repeatedly found his possessions rearranged in ways that spelled out old Slavic curses. The torment ended only when Pavel's grandmother, defying her grandson's orders, performed the traditional ritual of appeasement. She baked fresh bread, sprinkled it with salt and honey, and placed it by the stove while speaking the ancient words. "Grandfather Domovoi, master of this house, we honor you still. Forgive our neglect, and be our friend once more." That very night, the hostile presence lifted, the accident ceased, the nightmares ended, and the house itself seemed to breathe easier. But the domovoi's forgiveness came with a warning delivered through the grandmother's dreams. Remember that some bonds cannot be broken by education or modernity. Some contracts are written in blood and breath, not ink and paper. The domovoi represents the ancient understanding that homes are more than mere buildings. They are living entities with their own spirits and needs. In acknowledging the domovoi, our ancestors recognized that true domestic harmony requires respect for forces beyond human control. Even today, in remote Russian villages, families still follow the old customs. They speak kindly to their houses, leave offerings by the hearth, and listen carefully for the sounds that indicate their domovoi's mood, for they understand what Pavel Vulov learned too late, that some traditions survive because they encode truths about the world that rationality alone cannot grasp. Do you hear those creaks and groans in your own home at night? The settling of timbers, you say, perhaps? Or perhaps you too have a guardian, whose presence you've never acknowledged, whose protection you've taken for granted. The domovoi reminds us that gratitude is not weakness, but wisdom, and that the oldest contracts are often the most important ones to honor. Nosferatu, the plague, Eastern Germany, Poland. Long before Enno's shadowy film creature stalked across silent screens, the name Nosferatu struck terror into the hearts of German and Polish villages. This was no romantic nobleman in evening wear, but a grotesque harbinger of disease and death that emerged from the earth during times of plague and pestilence. The word itself comes from the Greek nospheros, plague-bearer, and indeed, wherever the Nosferatu walked, disease followed like a loyal hound. These creatures were born not from aristocratic bloodlines, but from the most wretched deaths imaginable. Victims of plague who died in such agony and desperation that their souls refused to accept the grave's embrace. In the winter of 1580, as the Black Death swept through the villages along the Uda River, the first recorded Nosferatu arose in what is now western Poland. Heinrich, the rat-catcher, a man who had grown wealthy by protecting granaries from vermin, had hoarded grain while his neighbors starved. When plague finally claimed him, his body showed the characteristic signs: blackened fingers, swollen lymph nodes, skin mottled with disease. They buried him in unconsecrated ground, as was proper for one who had shown such cruelty to the suffering. But Heinrich's avarice had created a hunger that transcended death itself. 3 nights later, he clawed his way from the frozen earth, no longer human, but something far more terrible. The Nosferatu that Heinrich became bore little resemblance to the man he once was. His flesh had taken on a grayish pallor mottled with dark veins that pulsed with corrupted blood. His fingernails had grown into yellow talons, perfect for tearing through cloth and flesh. Most horrible of all were his eyes, sunken deep into his skull. They glowed with a sickly phosphorescence that spoke of inner decay. Unlike other undead, the Nosferatu possessed an almost supernatural connection to disease and vermin. Rats followed in his wake, carrying plague fleas that spread death to every home he visited. His very presence contaminated the air, bringing fever, madness, and wasting sickness to all who breathed the same atmosphere. The creature's hunting patterns revealed a twisted intelligence. Heinrich would appear first to those he had wronged in life, the families he had allowed to starve, the children who had begged him for bread. But his revenge was not swift death. Instead, he would stand outside their windows night after night, breathing his poisonous exhalations through the cracks, slowly infecting entire households with supernatural plague. Father Wilhelm of Roswaf documented the creature's reign of terror in his chronicle, writing, "The thing that was once Heinrich brings death, not through violence, but through corruption itself. Those he visits sicken and die within 7 days, their bodies becoming vessels for the same evil that inhabits him. We have sealed the church doors and pray without ceasing, but still his shadow falls across our threshold." The Nosaratos plague was unlike any natural disease. Victims would experience vivid hallucinations of rotting food, swarms of insects, and the creature's ghastly face appearing in every shadow. They would develop an insatiable hunger for raw meat and a revulsion toward holy symbols. In their final stages, they would speak in voices not their own, reciting the names of Heinrich's future victims. The terror ended only when a group of survivors, led by Father Wilhelm, tracked the creature to its lair, an abandoned mill where Heinrich had once stored his hoarded grain. They found him during daylight hours, his body rigid and apparently lifeless, surrounded by thousands of dead rats and the skeletal remains of his plague victims. The destruction of a Nosferatu required more than simple stakes and holy water. This creature was sustained by disease itself, so its destruction demanded purification by fire. They built a pea of rowan wood and blessed herbs, then cast Heinrich's body into the flames, along with everything he had touched. As the fire consumed him, witnesses reported hearing not screams, but the sound of 1,000 dying rats. Even this was not enough. The contaminated mill had to be burned, the surrounding soil blessed and turned with salt, and every household in the village cleansed with smoke from burning sage and juniper. For the Nosarato's corruption could linger in objects, in buildings, even in the very air, ready to spawn new horrors when conditions were right. The legend of Heinrich reminds us that evil takes many forms, and that greed during times of suffering can create monsters that transcend ordinary understanding. In Eastern European folklore, the Nosferatu represents not just physical death, but spiritual corruption, the transformation of human nature into something that feeds on the misery of others. Modern medicine may have conquered the plagues that once terrorized our ancestors, but the deeper truth encoded in Nosferatu legends remains relevant. There are still those who profit from suffering, who hoard resources while others starve, who spread different kinds of poison through the communities they touch, and perhaps in some cosmic sense, such people risk becoming the very monsters they embody in life. Listen for the scratching at your windows on nights when sickness fills the air. Check your dreams for visions of decay and corruption, for the Nosferatu teaches us that some hungers are so grotesque, so fundamentally opposed to life itself, that they can survive even death, and in surviving, spread their corruption to everything they touch. Lay, the forest guardian, Russia, Finland, Baltic states. Deep in the primeval forests that stretch from the Baltic to the Urals dwells a creature older than Christianity, older than human memory itself. The Lay, Lord of the Forest, Guardian of the Wild, a being of such primal power that even mentioning his name incorrectly can summon his terrible attention. This is no gentle tree spirit from fairy tales, but a force of nature incarnate, as vast and unpredictable as the wilderness itself. The Lay stands as tall as the trees he protects, his body covered in bark-like skin, his hair and beard woven from moss and pine needles, his eyes are the green of deep forest pools, ancient and knowing, holding memories of when the world was young and humans were merely another species struggling for survival. The Lay possesses the ability to change his size at will, shrinking to hide behind the smallest sapling or growing until his head brushes the clouds. His voice can mimic any sound of the forest, the whisper of wind through leaves, the crack of breaking branches, the call of wolves. Most disturbing of all, he can perfectly imitate human voices, using this ability to lead travelers astray in the endless maze of trees. Basile Petro, a merchant from Tiver, learned this lesson in the harshest possible way during the autumn of 1654. Leading a caravan of goods through the forest road to Novgorod, he ignored his guide's warnings about showing proper respect to the forest spirits. When the old woodsman insisted they leave offerings of bread and salt at a particular grove, Vasile mocked such peasant superstitions and ordered the caravan to continue. That evening, as they made camp in a clearing that seemed somehow too perfectly circular, too deliberately arranged, strange things began to happen. First, their horses became restless, whinnying and trying to break free of their tethers. Then, the temperature dropped unnaturally despite the lack of wind or clouds. Finally, as full darkness fell, they heard voices calling from the forest, the voices of their family members crying out for help. Vasile's youngest nephew, Pavel, heard his mother calling for him and rushed toward the sound before anyone could stop him. They searched all night by torchlight, calling his name until their voices were hoarse, but found no trace of the boy. As dawn broke, they discovered something that chilled them to the bone. A single set of footprints leading from their camp into the forest. But these prints changed as they progressed, starting human-sized, but gradually becoming larger. The spacing between them increasing until they were the stride of a giant. The lay had taken Pavel, but not out of mere malice. In the folklore of the forest people, the lay serves as both judge and executioner for those who disrespect the wilderness. He protects not only the trees and animals, but the ancient balance between human civilization and the wild places that existed before cities, before farms, before humans decided they were masters rather than participants in the natural world. For 3 days, Bosel's caravan searched the forest, guided by the old woodsman who knew the proper rituals for appeasing the lay. They left offerings at sacred groves, spoke the ancient words of respect, and performed the ceremonies their ancestors had practiced for generations. On the 3rd night, as they prepared to give up hope, they heard Pavel's voice again. But this time it came from directly above them. Looking up, they saw the boy suspended in the highest branches of an enormous pine tree, far too high for any human to climb. He appeared unharmed, but somehow changed. His clothes were dry despite 3 days of autumn rain. His face held an expression of profound peace, and when he spoke, his voice carried an echo of wind through leaves. "The Lord of the forest has shown me such wonders," Pavel said, his voice dreamy and distant. "I have seen the secret places where the old gods still hold court, where time moves differently, where the trees themselves remember the first songs ever sung. He says, I may return to you, but I must carry his message. The forest is not yours to take without asking." The lay lowered Pavel to the ground, gently using branches that bent like living arms. As the boy touched earth again, the temperature returned to normal. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the horses calmed. But Vasily noticed that his nephew's eyes now held flecks of green that hadn't been there before, and occasionally, when the wind blew through the trees, Pavel would tilt his head as if listening to voices only he could hear. The merchant's party completed their journey without further incident, but Vasily found himself forever changed by the encounter. He never again traveled through forests without leaving proper offerings, never cut a tree without asking permission, never forgot that some powers demand respect rather than fear. His nephew Pavel eventually became a renowned woodsman and guide, able to navigate any forest without compass or map, as if the trees themselves whispered directions in his ear. The lay represents humanity's ancient understanding that we are not separate from nature, but part of it, subject to its laws, and dependent on its mercy. In an age when forests are seen as resources to be harvested rather than living ecosystems to be honored, the legend of the forest guardian reminds us that our relationship with the wild world has consequences beyond mere economics. Modern environmentalists might smile at the primitive beliefs of Russian peasants, but the lay embodies a wisdom that scientific ecology has only recently begun to rediscover. That forests are complex, interconnected communities of life, that cutting trees without understanding these connections can have catastrophic consequences, and that approaching wilderness with humility rather than arrogance is not superstition, but survival. The next time you walk in deep woods, pay attention to the quality of silence around you. Notice how sound travels differently among old trees, how shadows seem to move independently of their sources, how certain groves feel somehow more alive than others. You may not see the lay, but he sees you, and he remembers every gesture of respect or disrespect you show to his domain. In the great forests of Eastern Europe, they still speak his name with reverence. They still leave offerings at the old groves, still ask permission before taking from the wild, still remember that some guardians never sleep and never forget. For the lay teaches us that the price of forgetting our place in the natural order is not just ecological disaster, but the loss of our own humanity. Kikomora, the swamp, which Russia, Belarus, Lithuania, in the murky depths of Eastern European swamplands, where mist clings to stagnant water and treacherous bogs, conceal unspeakable secrets, dwells one of the most feared creatures in Slavic folklore, the Kikimora, neither fully alive nor completely dead, a being born from the intersection of water, earth, and feminine rage. Picture the endless marshlands of Belarus, where traditional villages perch on islands of solid ground, surrounded by vast expanses of wetland. To outsiders, these swamps might appear empty, lifeless wastes, but the marsh dwellers know better. They understand that these waters teem with spirits, and none more dangerous than the Kik. She appears as a gaunt woman of indeterminate age, her skin gray-green like pond scum, her hair hanging in wet tangles threaded with marsh grass and small bones. Some say she has the legs of a chicken. Others claim her lower body dissolves into mist when threatened. What all accounts agree upon is her hands, impossibly long fingers ending in black talons, perfect for reaching through murky water to drag down the unwary. The Kikimora's origins vary from region to region, but most agree she was once human, a woman who died in water under tragic circumstances. Some say she was a suicide, drowning herself to escape an unwanted marriage. Others claim she was a murdered bride thrown into the swamp by a jealous rival. The most disturbing version suggests she was a witch who made a pact with dark powers, trading her humanity for dominion over the wetlands. Whatever her origin, the Kikima's nature is unmistakably malevolent. She delights in leading travelers astray with will-o'-the-wisps, phantom lights that dance across the marsh, luring them deeper into the bog until they sink beneath the surface. Unlike quick deaths from other monsters, drowning in a Kikimora swamp is a prolonged agony. She keeps her victims barely alive, feeding on their terror as they slowly disappear into the mud. The legend of Mara the Weaver illustrates the Kikimora's particular cruelty toward women. Mara was renowned throughout the Pripyat marshes for her skill with loom and thread, creating textiles so beautiful that nobles traveled from distant cities to commission her work. But her talent came with a price. Endless hours bent over her loom, sacrificing marriage and motherhood for artistic perfection. One autumn evening, as Martha worked late by candlelight, she heard the sound of another loom operating somewhere in the marsh. The rhythm was hypnotic, perfectly synchronized with her own work, and gradually she realized that whoever was weaving out there possessed even greater skill than herself. Pride and curiosity overcame caution, and she followed the sound into the misty wetlands. She found the Kikimora seated on a throne of woven reeds, working at a loom made from human bones and sinew. The thread she wove glowed with an eerie phosphorescence, and the pattern taking shape was more beautiful than anything Martha had ever imagined, a tapestry that seemed to contain the very essence of moonlight and shadow. Mortal woman, the Kikimora spoke without looking up from her work, her voice like water gurgling through reeds. You think yourself a master of the loom? Let us see how your skill compares to mine. We shall weave until dawn, and whoever creates the more beautiful work shall claim the other's soul. Mara, intoxicated by the challenge and the otherworldly beauty of the Kikimora's creation, accepted. They wove through the night, their looms keeping perfect time like the heartbeats of sleeping gods. As the hours passed, Martha felt her humanity draining away with each pass of the shuttle. Her fingers began to elongate, her skin took on a grayish pallor, and her eyes developed the flat, reflective quality of still water. With the first light of dawn, both weavers completed their works. Martha's tapestry was indeed magnificent, depicting the cycle of seasons with threads of gold and silver. But the Kikimora's creation defied mortal comprehension. It showed the hidden connections between all living things, the secret names of forgotten gods, the exact moment when night becomes day and day becomes night. You have lost, little weaver. The Kikimora smiled, revealing teeth like broken shells. But I am not without mercy. You may keep your soul, but you must take my place as guardian of the marsh. Weave warnings for those who would disturb our realm, and in return, I shall teach you the patterns that connect earth to sky, water to fire, life to that. Martha became the Kikima's apprentice, learning to spin threads from moonbeams and starlight, to weave with the voices of drowned spirits and the whispers of will-o'-the-wisps. Villagers report that on clear nights, they can still see lights moving through the marsh in complex patterns, the Kikima and her student working at their eternal looms. creating tapestries that map the secret architecture of reality itself. The Kikima serves as a warning about the dangers of pride and isolation. In her watery realm, she represents the feminine creative force turned destructive when denied proper recognition or companionship. Her mastery of weaving and textile arts reflects women's traditional domains, but her solitary existence in the swamps suggests what happens when that creativity becomes divorced from human community. Marsh dwellers have developed numerous protections against the Kikimora's influence. Iron needles sewn into clothing can prevent her from unraveling the fabric of one's life. Red thread worn around the wrist confuses her ability to weave fate. Most importantly, travelers must never follow mysterious lights in the marsh, no matter how beautiful or enticing they appear. But the Kikimora is not purely malevolent. Like many spirits of Eastern European folklore, she can be bargained with by those who approach her with proper respect. Midwives and healers sometimes seek her aid in difficult births, for her mastery of the threads of life and death makes her a powerful ally in matters of creation. She has been known to teach sacred weaving patterns to women who honor the old ways, gifts that can bring prosperity to entire communities. The modern world has largely forgotten the Kikimora, dismissing her as peasant superstition. But environmentalists working to preserve wetland ecosystems might recognize in her legend a profound truth that marshes are among the most complex and vital environments on Earth, connecting terrestrial and aquatic systems in ways that science is only beginning to understand. Destroying a swamp in this view is like cutting the threads in a cosmic tapestry, unraveling connections that took millennia to weave. The Kikimora's rage at such destruction is not mere spite, but the fury of a master craftsman watching their life's work destroyed by those too ignorant to recognize its value. Tonight, if you pass by wetlands in the darkness, look carefully at any lights you see moving through the mist. They might be natural phenomena, foxfire, methane gas, or bioluminescent organisms. Or they might be the Kikimora, still weaving her patterns in the space between water and sky, still teaching the hard lesson that creativity without compassion becomes a force of destruction rather than creation. Drower, the Walking Dead. Scandinavia, Chibi-Baltic region. From the fjords of Norway to the pine forests of Finland comes a creature that makes other undead seem almost benevolent by comparison. The Draga, known in Baltic regions as not, represents death's refusal to release its grip on life, resulting in something that is neither properly alive nor peacefully dead. Unlike vampires who maintain some semblance of their former humanity, the Draugr is a grotesque parody of life itself. Imagine a corpse that has begun to decay but continues to move with supernatural purpose, growing larger and stronger with each passing night until it becomes a giant of rotting flesh and bone, driven by hungers that transcend mortal understanding. The Draugr typically arises from those who died with powerful attachments to the material world, misers who hoarded gold, warriors who refused to accept defeat, or anyone who met their end while consumed by overwhelming rage or greed. Death becomes not an ending, but a transformation into something far more terrible than they were in life. In the winter of 1402, the coastal village of Vardø in northern Norway became the hunting ground of Bernir, a Viking raider who had refused to accept that the age of conquest was ending. Even as Christianity spread through Scandinavia, Bern continued to raid monasteries and merchant ships, accumulating a vast hoard of treasure that he buried in secret locations along the coast. When rival chieftains finally cornered and killed him, Bern died, cursing their names, and swearing that neither death nor the new god would keep him from his gold. They buried him hastily in unconsecrated ground, eager to forget the violence he had brought to their region. But Björn's attachment to his treasure proved stronger than the grave's embrace. 3 months after his burial, fishermen began reporting strange occurrences along the coast. Boats were found smashed to splinters on calm nights, their crews missing. Burial mounds were discovered broken open from within, their grave goods scattered as if someone had been searching frantically for something specific. Most disturbing of all, witnesses reported seeing a massive figure wandering the shoreline at night, larger than any living man, leaving footprints that glowed with a sickly fire. The creature that Bern had become stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body bloated with supernatural corruption. His skin had taken on a blue-black color, stretched tight over muscles that continued to grow despite his dead state. His eyes burned with the cold light of the aurora borealis, and his breath came out as freezing mist that could kill plant life with a single exhale. But the Draugur's most terrible weapon was not his size or strength. It was his intelligence. Unlike mindless zombies, the Draugur retained all the cunning and knowledge of their human life, enhanced by supernatural awareness and freed from moral constraints. Byrne remembered every hiding place of his treasure, every enemy who had wronged him, every slight he had suffered. And now he had eternity to seek revenge. His first victims were the chieftains who had killed him. He appeared at their halls during the deepest part of winter when the nights stretched endlessly, and the aurora painted the sky in supernatural colors. His mere presence could drive men mad with terror, and his touch brought a freezing death that no fire could warm. Harold Redbeard, one of his killers, barricaded himself in his longhouse with 50 warriors, believing that numbers would protect him. They found his stronghold the next morning, buried under an avalanche that had struck on a windless night, every man inside crushed except for Harold himself, who was discovered frozen solid, but with his eyes wide open, staring at something too terrible to comprehend. The Draugur's rampage continued for months, and traditional methods of dealing with the undead proved useless. Holy water boiled away at his touch, crosses crumbled to dust in his presence, and blessed weapons passed through his body without effect. The creature seemed to exist partially outside the physical world, able to become insubstantial when attacked, but devastatingly solid when he chose to strike. Father Olaf, a Christian priest who had studied the old ways, finally discovered the key to defeating Byrne. The Draugur's power came from his connection to his treasure. Every coin, every piece of jewelry, every weapon he had hoarded in life served as an anchor, binding his spirit to the physical world. To destroy him, they would have to find and consecrate every single item he had hidden. The hunt for Byrne's treasure became a race against time, for with each passing night, the Draugur grew stronger and more cunning. Local shamans and Christian priests worked together, using both runic magic and holy relics to track down the hidden hoards. They found gold buried under standing stones, silver hidden in sea caves, weapons wrapped in sealskin, and sunk in sacred pools. With each treasure cache they discovered and blessed, Björn's power diminished. His massive form began to shrink, his supernatural strength waned, and his ability to manipulate the physical world weakened. But the creature fought back with desperate fury, summoning blizzards to bury the searchers, causing avalanches to block mountain passes, and sending phantom longships filled with ghostly warriors to attack the villages. The final confrontation came at Byrne's original burial mound, where the last and greatest of his treasures lay hidden. As the priests began their ritual of consecration, the Draugur appeared in his full, terrible glory, now transparent as ice, but radiating cold that froze the very air around him. His voice boomed across the tundra like breaking glaciers. "You think your weak god can chain the storm? I am winter incarnate, death that walks, the fury of the old ways given form. I will not be bound by your symbols and ceremonies." But Father Olaf had learned something crucial from the old shamans. The Draugur's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. His attachment to material wealth, so strong it had carried him beyond death, could also be used to bind him. As the final blessing was spoken over his treasure, Byrne let out a shriek that shattered ice for miles around, his form dissolving like frost in spring sunlight. Yet even this was not the end. The shamans warned that a Draugur could only be temporarily dispersed, not truly destroyed. They built a stone circle around his burial mound, carved with both runic wards and Christian crosses, and established a tradition that lasted for centuries. Every winter solstice, the villagers would gather to renew the binding spells, ensuring that Byrne's spirit remained trapped. The Draugur represents more than just fear of the undead. It embodies our anxiety about the corrupting influence of material attachment. In Byrne's transformation, we see what happens when the desire for wealth becomes so powerful that it survives even death, creating a being that can never be satisfied because it can never truly possess anything. In our modern age of consumerism and material accumulation, the Draugur legend takes on new relevance. How many of us cling so tightly to our possessions that we lose sight of what truly matters? How many sacrifice relationships, health, even peace of mind in pursuit of wealth that we cannot take with us beyond the grave? The Baltic peoples understood that death was not the ultimate tragedy. The ultimate tragedy was allowing our attachments to become so strong that they prevented us from finding peace, even in death. The Drauga stalks through the northern nights as a reminder that some prisons are of our own making, and some chains are forged not by our enemies, but by our own desires. Listen to the wind howling through winter darkness. Feel the cold that penetrates beyond mere physical discomfort, and remember that somewhere in the northern wastes, bound by ancient spells, but never truly destroyed, things that were once human prowl. The boundaries between life and death, teaching the eternal lesson that some hungers can never be satisfied no matter how much we feed them. Werewolf, the curse of the wolf, Poland, Eastern Germany, Lithuania, in the vast forests of Eastern Europe, where wolves, once ruled as undisputed masters and humans, lived in constant fear of howls in the darkness. There arose legends of creatures that bridged the gap between man and beast. The werewolf, known locally as Wilkowak, Vukodak, or Viltokus, represents one of humanity's oldest and most primal fears, the beast that lurks within us all. These are not the romanticized shapeshifters of modern fiction, but creatures born of genuine terror and ancient understanding of the thin line separating civilization from savagery. In the folk traditions of Poland and the Baltic states, becoming a werewolf was both curse and revelation, a stripping away of human pretense to reveal the predatory nature that society works so hard to conceal. The transformation could occur through various means, each reflecting different aspects of moral and spiritual corruption. Some were cursed by witches for crimes against the innocent. Others were born under specific astrological conditions. During a solar eclipse, or when the moon was dark and wolves howled in the forest. But the most feared werewolves were those who had chosen their fate, making deliberate pacts with dark forces in exchange for power over the wilderness. Consider the tale of Stefan Kowalski, a Polish nobleman whose estate bordered the Great Bawa Forest in the 16th century. Stefan was known for his cruelty to his serfs, his passion for hunting, and his conviction that the strong had divine right to prey upon the weak. When famine struck his lands, he continued to live in luxury, while his peasants starved, justifying their suffering as the natural order of things. The transformation began during a particularly harsh winter hunt. Stefan and his party had been tracking a massive wolf pack that had killed several villagers' livestock. As they pursued the wolves deeper into the primeval forest, Stefan became separated from his companions in a sudden blizzard. Lost and alone, he took shelter in what appeared to be an abandoned cave. But the cave was not empty. In each steps, Stefan encountered something that challenged his understanding of reality. An ancient crone who introduced herself as the Forest Mother, keeper of the old laws that governed the relationship between predator and prey. She offered Stefan a choice: abandon his cruel ways and live as a humble man, or embrace his true nature and become the perfect predator he believed himself to be. Stefan Aragon, even in the face of supernatural power, chose transformation. The crone smiled with teeth like broken glass, and spoke a single word in a language older than Polish, older than Latin, older than any human tongue. Pain beyond description racked Stefan's body as his bones began to stretch and crack. His muscles bulged with unnatural strength and coarse hair sprouted across his skin. But the physical transformation was nothing compared to the mental change. Stefan felt his human consciousness fragmenting as wolf instincts flooded his mind. The scent of fear, the taste of blood, the irresistible urge to hunt in pack formation. He retained his human intelligence, but lost his human morality, becoming a creature of pure predatory cunning. The werewolf Stefan stood 7 feet tall on his hind legs, covered in black fur that seemed to absorb moonlight. His jaws could crack bones like twigs, his claws could shred armor, and his howl could be heard for miles across the forest. Most terrifying of all, he retained the ability to speak, using human language to mock his victims and revel in their terror. His hunting pattern revealed the twisted logic of his transformation. Stefan targeted those who reminded him of his former human weaknesses: the wealthy who abused their power, the strong who preyed upon the weak, the cruel who showed no mercy to those beneath them. In his werewolf form, he became the ultimate expression of the very callousness he had embodied as a human. The countryside lived in terror for 3 years as Stefan's pack, for he had infected others with his curse, hunted throughout the region. They showed intelligence that surpassed ordinary wolves, setting elaborate traps for their human prey and coordinating attacks with military precision. Witnesses reported seeing the werewolves walking upright through villages at night, their eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence as they selected their victims. Father Matthias, the local priest, recognized that conventional weapons would be useless against such creatures. Drawing upon both Christian theology and older folk wisdom, he discovered that werewolves, despite their supernatural strength, retained certain human vulnerabilities. Silver could wound them because it was sacred to the moon goddess who governed their transformations. Iron, blessed by church bells, could bind them because it connected to the industrial power that was slowly taming the wilderness. The confrontation came during the winter solstice, when Stefan's power would be at its peak, but as human consciousness at its weak. Father Macias led a party of volunteers into the boa forest, armed with silver-tipped spears and iron nets, blessed with holy water. They tracked the werewolf pack to a clearing where ancient standing stones marked a place of power predating Christianity. The battle was savage and brief. Stefan's pack fought with inhuman ferocity, but they had grown overconfident in their supernatural advantages. The blessed weapons proved effective, wounding creatures that had seemed invulnerable. More importantly, Father Matthias understood that the werewolves' greatest strength, their pack loyalty, could become their weakness. When Stefan was finally cornered, pierced through the heart with a silver spear, his transformation reversed with agonizing slowness. As he lay dying, his human form restored, he spoke his final words. "You think you have one, priest? Look around you. Every man here carries the wolf within. I simply had the courage to let it free." His prophecy proved partially true. Several of the men who had fought the werewolves reported strange dreams in the following months. Visions of running through forests on 4 legs, tasting blood, feeling the wild freedom that Stefan had embraced. Some claimed to have found their own clothing torn and bloody after nights they couldn't remember. The werewolf's curse, it seemed, was not entirely contained within his bloodline. The werewolf tradition in Eastern European folklore serves as a complex metaphor for the relationship between civilization and savagery. Unlike Western European werewolf legends, which often emphasized the tragic nature of the transformation, Slavic werewolf stories frequently suggested that the curse revealed rather than created the beast within. In Stefan's tale, we see the uncomfortable truth that the capacity for cruelty exists within all humans, and that the structures of civilization exist, not to express our better nature, but to restrain our worse impulses. The werewolf becomes a cautionary figure, showing what happens when power is divorced from empathy, when strength is used to prey upon the weak. The forests of Eastern Europe have been largely tamed in the centuries since these legends arose, but the psychological truths they encode remain relevant. In every generation, we see individuals who seem to lose their humanity, who prey upon others with an intensity that suggests something beyond mere moral failure. The werewolf legend reminds us that the line between human and beast is not as clear as we might hope. On nights when the moon is full and the wind carries howls through the darkness, remember Stefan's transformation. Consider how thin the veneer of civilization really is, how quickly it can be stripped away when we convince ourselves that our desires justify any action. The werewolf stalks through our collective nightmares, not as an external threat, but as a reflection of our own capacity for monstrous behavior. In the great forests of Poland, they still tell stories of shapes moving between the trees, of eyes that reflect firelight with too much intelligence, of howls that sound almost like human laughter. Whether these are actual werewolves or simply the echoes of ancient fears, they serve the same purpose, reminding us that some hungers once awakened can never be fully satisfied and some transformations can never be completely reversed. Poltergeist. Poltergeist, the noisy spirits, German Czech border, or Austria. Our final tale brings us to perhaps the most unsettling of all supernatural phenomena, not because it threatens physical harm, but because it violates the very sanctuary of home itself. The Poltergeist, whose name literally means noisy spirit in German, represents chaos incarnate. The force that turns familiar spaces into landscapes of inexplicable terror. Unlike ghosts, which typically manifest as visual apparitions with clear purposes, poltergeists announce themselves through disturbances that defy rational explanation. Objects fly through the air without being touched. Furniture rearranges itself in impossible configurations, and sounds echo through houses that seem to come from within the very walls themselves. In the autumn of 1612, the prosperous household of Master Jan Brinner, a clockmaker in the Bohemian town of Chasy Krumlov, became the epicenter of phenomena so disturbing that they attracted the attention of scholars from Prague and investigators from the Holy Roman Court. What began as minor annoyances, doors creaking when no wind stirred, the sound of footsteps in empty rooms, escalated into a reign of supernatural terror that would test the faith and sanity of everyone involved. The disturbances centered around Jan's 14-year-old daughter, Greta, though she claimed no awareness of any connection to the strange events. It began with her needlework, threads that knotted themselves, fabric that tore without cause, needles that bent into impossible shapes overnight. Jon, a practical man, accustomed to the precision of clockwork, initially blamed his daughter's carelessness. But the phenomena quickly expanded beyond anything that could be attributed to human error. Plates shattered spontaneously during family meals, sending sharp fragments flying in directions that physics could not explain. The family's carefully crafted clocks began chiming at random intervals, their internal mechanisms found twisted into configurations that should have rendered them inoperable, yet somehow didn't. Most disturbing were the sounds, not random noise, but seemingly purposeful communications. Knocking that responded to questions with mathematical precision. 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Whispers that seemed to come from inside solid walls, speaking words and languages that no one in the household recognized. The voice of what sounded like a young child, giggling and calling Greta's name at all hours of the night. Father Benedict, the local priest, initially approached the situation with skepticism born of theological training. He suspected trickery, perhaps designed to avoid arranged marriage or escape unwanted responsibilities. But his certainty crumbled during his first night in the Brenner household, when he witnessed phenomena that challenged not only his understanding of the natural world, but his faith in divine protection. As Father Benedict attempted to bless the house, the very religious objects he carried became weapons turned against him. His crucifix grew burning hot in his hands, forcing him to drop it. Holy water boiled in its container, producing steam that formed shapes resembling writhing serpents. Most shocking of all, the words of Latin prayers seemed to emerge from his mouth backward, as if some force was intercepting and reversing his sacred speech. The poltergeist's intelligence became evident through its responses to different attempts at communication. When scholars arrived with scientific instruments primitive by modern standards, but advanced for the early 17th century, the entities seemed to understand their purpose and began manipulating their measurements in ways that suggested not malevolence, but mischievous intelligence. Dr. Markus Linitz, a natural philosopher from Prague, documented experiments in which the poltergeist would consistently interfere with mechanical devices while leaving organic materials untouched. Clocks stopped or ran backward. Compass needles spun wildly, but candles burned normally, and food remained unspoiled. The entity appeared to have a specific affinity for objects requiring precision and order, perhaps reflecting some deeper connection to the clockmaker's trade that had originally attracted its attention. Greta herself remained the eye of this supernatural storm, seemingly unaware of her role in the phenomenon, yet clearly its focal point. Modern researchers might recognize symptoms of adolescent psychological stress, but 17th-century observers saw something more mysterious. During the height of the disturbances, witnesses reported that Greta's shadow moved independently of her body, that her reflection in mirrors sometimes showed her performing actions she wasn't actually making. The most terrifying incident occurred during a formal investigation conducted by representatives of the imperial court. As they interviewed Greta in the family's main room, documenting each question and response, the poltergeist began throwing objects with increasing violence. But the trajectory of these projectiles revealed disturbing intelligence. They never struck Greta directly, always missing her by inches, as if the entity was careful not to harm the person it had bonded with. Then came the moment that convinced even the most skeptical observers of the supernatural nature of these events. As the investigators pressed Greta with increasingly aggressive questions about her possible role in the phenomena, every clock in the house began chiming simultaneously, not in unison but in a complex pattern that spelled out words in the old Morse-like code used by town criers. The message was clear and chilling. "She is mine now. Leave her alone." The resolution came not through exorcism or scientific intervention, but through understanding. Father Benedict, working with local wise women who remembered. Pre-Christian traditions realized that the poltergeist was not an evil spirit, but a lost soul-seeking connection. Through careful questioning using the entity's knocking code, they learned its story. A young apprentice clockmaker who had died in the workshop decades earlier, crushed by falling machinery, his spirit trapped in the liminal space between life and death. The apprentice's ghost had been drawn to Greta because her presence in the workshop, where she often helped her father, reminded him of the human connection he had lost. His manifestations were not attacks, but attempts at communication, growing more violent only when he felt ignored or threatened with separation from the family that had become his anchor to the world of the living. The final ceremony combined Christian ritual with older traditions of honoring the restless dead. They created a memorial for the dead apprentice in the workshop, acknowledging his contributions to the craft and his right to be remembered. They spoke his name with respect, honored his skill, and promised that his work would not be forgotten. As the memorial service concluded, the supernatural disturbances ceased as suddenly as they had begun. The clocks returned to normal operation, objects remained where they were placed, and the oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the house for months lifted like fog before sunrise. Greta reported one final communication, a sense of gratitude and relief, as if a burden she hadn't known she was carrying had been removed. The Brenna poltergeist case became one of the most thoroughly documented supernatural events of the early modern period, influencing both religious and scientific approaches to unexplained phenomena. It demonstrated that polterists, unlike malevolent spirits, often sought not to harm, but to communicate, using the only means available to entities trapped between worlds. Modern psychology might explain poltergeist phenomena through unconscious psychokinesis, the theory that extreme emotional states, particularly in adolescence, can manifest as physical disturbances in the environment. But the Brenna case suggests something more complex, an interaction between human consciousness and forces that exist beyond our current understanding of reality. The poltergeist reminds us that homes are more than physical structures. They are repositories of memory, emotion, and spiritual energy. When we live in spaces where intense experiences have occurred, we may find ourselves sharing that space with echoes of the past, presences that seek acknowledgement rather than elimination. Tonight, as you settle into your own home, pay attention to the small sounds around you, the settling of floorboards, the whisper of wind through gaps in windows, the distant creaking that you've learned to ignore. Most are simply the natural sounds of a living structure, adapting to changes in temperature and humidity. But sometimes, just sometimes, those sounds might be something more, a presence seeking not to frighten, but to be remembered, to be acknowledged, to find peace in the simple recognition that once, long ago, someone else called this place home. And so, our journey through the shadowlands of Eastern Europe concludes, but the echoes of these ancient tales continue to resonate through the corridors of our collective unconscious. We have walked with vampires and werewolves, danced with storm spirits and forest guardians, glimpsed the terrible faces that peer back at us from the dark mirrors of folklore and legend. What have we learned from these voyages into the Gothic imagination of the Slavic and Baltic peoples? That their nightmares were not mere entertainment, but encoded wisdom about the human condition. Warnings about the consequences of abandoning compassion, respect for the natural world, and connection to community. The strigoi taught us that unfinished business and unresolved hatred can create monsters that transcend death itself. The Rusha showed us the terrible price of despair and the way violence against the innocent echoes through generations. Baba Yaga revealed that power without wisdom becomes cruelty, while the lay reminded us that humanity is not separate from nature but part of it, subject to laws older than civilization. Each creature we encountered served as both terror and teacher, reflecting aspects of ourselves that we would prefer to keep hidden. The werewolf within that emerges when we convince ourselves that strength justifies cruelty. The poltergeist that manifests when our need for connection becomes desperate enough to disturb the boundaries between worlds. These legends survive, not because our ancestors were more superstitious than we are, but because they encoded truths about human nature and the natural world that remain relevant regardless of technological advancement. In an age when we often feel disconnected from the earth, from community, from the deeper patterns that govern existence, these Gothic tales offer both warning and guidance. They remind us that some boundaries should not be crossed, Some hungers cannot be satisfied through material means, and some connections to the land, to the dead, to the wild places of the world must be maintained if we are to remain fully human. If you have found wisdom in these dark tales, if you feel the call to explore further into the Gothic traditions of the world, then subscribe to our channel and join the Ravenhurst community. Share these stories with those who understand that sometimes truth comes dressed as nightmare, that sometimes the most important lessons are taught by creatures that should not exist. Leave a comment telling us which of these Eastern European legends spoke to you most deeply, which nightmares will follow you into sleep tonight. And remember, in subscribing to this channel, you become part of an ancient tradition, keepers of stories that must not be forgotten, guardians of wisdom that comes from the shadow side of human experience. Until we meet again in the candlelit chambers of Gothic imagination, may your nights be filled with beautiful terrors and your dreams haunted by truths too profound for daylight contemplation. The darkness holds many secrets yet to be unveiled, and Mr. Ravenhurst will be your faithful guide through whatever shadows await. Sleep well, dear listeners, and remember, the best monsters are always the ones that show us something true about ourselves.